Hello everyone, this is Bob and Threadbare, and welcome back to Threadbare Reviews. Today's request is from patron JimJam78, who wanted me to take a look at a classic book by a classic author, Guards by Terry Pratchett. The book first came out in 1989, making it the 8th novel in his long-running Discworld series. About the author. Chances are good that you've heard of Terry Pratchett even if you've never read one of his books. He was an English author born in 1948 in Beaconsfield, a suburb of London. Pratchett apparently had a rather rough childhood thanks to a speech impediment that made him the target of bullies, and so his primary refuges were the public library and astronomy. However, Pratchett wasn't very good at math, and so instead of becoming an astronomer, he became interested in science fiction. Pratchett became a journalist when he left high school, but it wasn't long before he started publishing short stories and selling science fiction manuscripts to local publishers. He continued to work in journalism for several years, and it wasn't until he published The Color of Magic in 1983 that he became famous as an author. The Color of Magic was the start of Pratchett's move to fantasy literature, and it was the first of what would become the 41-novel Discworld series. Pratchett switched to writing full-time in 1987, and aside from Discworld, he also wrote children's books and collaborated with other authors like Neil Gaiman and Stephen Baxter. Aside from writing, he continued to be a fan of science and astronomy, and when the personal computer took off in the 80s, he became one of the first big fantasy authors to switch from typewriters to word processors. He also used his computer to play video games and interact with his fans. Unfortunately, something else Pratchett started early was Alzheimer's disease, which he was diagnosed with in 2007, at the age of 59. He spent a lot of his last years donating money and raising awareness of the disease, but he then died of it in 2015. But let's jump back a ways. Back to the novel Guards. The review. The city of Ankh-morpork is a metropolis with over 1 million residents, the largest population center in Discworld. It's a mercantile city ruled by a patrician, and Patrician Vetinari currently keeps the peace by legitimizing the Thieves Guild and the Assassins Guild and having them take care of the criminals who aren't properly registered. Ankh-morpork does have a city watch, but the day watch is just for show, and the night watch consists of 3 losers who can't get any better jobs. Guards begins with the night watch getting a 4th member, named Carrot, a human who was raised by dwarfs. Dwarfs who mistakenly believed that being in the City Watch was prestigious. Meanwhile, a secret society spends its nights summoning a dragon, because dragons are stopped by mighty kings in exile, and a king supplied by the secret society can be controlled. Things go according to plan at first, as the Puppet King arrives and appears to defeat the summoned dragon, but then the dragon finds its way into reality on its own, and it decides to kill the king and become the new tyrant of Ankh-morpork. Fortunately, the dragon is stopped thanks to a combination of the Night Watch's efforts and Lady Sybil Ramkin, a noblewoman who breeds swamp dragons and becomes a love interest to Knight Captain Sam Vimes. Guards is very much a comedy book. It's got a strong dose of what I would call the British style of humor, by which I mean that every page has at least one joke or bit of deadpan sarcasm, and the text often goes on tangents to discuss some humorous aspect of the world or character's backstory. It's very similar in this respect to Douglas Adams and the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series, but Pratchett's tangents aren't nearly as long as Adams', and the book's plot sticks much closer to the main action, instead of meandering around. That said, the main cast of the book is fairly large, and we shift perspectives regularly. I didn't have too much trouble following along, but even by the end of the book, I couldn't quite tell Sergeant Colon and Corporal Nobbs apart. One of them is overweight and the other one is scrawny, but they have more or less identical outlooks on life. Captain Vimes shares this outlook at the start too, but he, at least, goes through some significant character development. In fact, I get the feeling that Carrot was originally supposed to be the book's main protagonist, but then Vimes wound up being so much more interesting that Pratchett focused more on him. And he was right about that. Vimes is definitely a better lead character than Carrot. As for the tone of the book, it's less high fantasy and more urban fantasy, which is a fairly significant departure from Pratchett's previous Discworld novels. The people of Ankh-morpork have a much more contemporary feel to them than the average fantasy society. and the novel borrows a lot of characters and themes from more modern genres like hard-boiled detective stories and political thrillers. Fantasy tropes are still around, but by this point they've been around for so long that several characters invoke them deliberately. Of course, that last trait is common throughout the Discworld books. I've got more to say about the content of the book, but it's better suited for the analysis section. As for this section, I'd say that Guards is both thoughtful and humorous, and I can see why Pratchett wrote a full 7 more novels focused on the rise of the Night Watch. And while this novel wasn't the first one Pratchett wrote, it's entertaining, and it introduces a new set of characters, so it's a good place to start for anyone interested in the Discworld series. The analysis. Guards is an allegory for the rise of authoritarianism. It starts with a power-hungry politician or bureaucrat starting a populist movement that targets the less intelligent members of the public and promises to fix all of their petty grievances. The movement stokes these grievances into acts of hatred and violence, and while the politician pretends to be outraged by it, he continues to encourage his followers to greater heights. The politician then creates a popular figurehead who promises to end the violence by representing the angry supporters and making sweeping changes to society and the government, but in the end, the violence takes over, and the most vicious and aggressive person is the one who takes the crown. As for the politician who started the whole mess, he either gets purged right away for being a threat to the monarch's power, or he gets to live for a while as a servile bootlicker who has even less power than he did when he started, and then he gets purged. The dragon in the book represents populist violence, and it's pretty explicit about this representation. A section late in the novel mentions that the nature of the dragon summoning spell causes the summoner to imprint their mentality onto the dragon, and as such, its cruelty and its greed and its need for dominance are direct reflections on the bureaucrat who summoned it. And so, while the bureaucrat pretends to instigate this violence for the sake of improving things for everyone, possibly even fooling himself, his actions, ultimately, speak for themselves. And in the end, they bite him right in the ass. On the other side of things, we've got Carrot. Carrot is the traditional long-lost king whose role is to defeat the dragon and restore the monarchy. But then he doesn't exactly do either of those things. Instead, what he does is represent the rule of law. He reads the whole book of ankh-morpork's laws and then does his best to enforce them on everyone, regardless of their station or privileges. So while he doesn't finish off the dragon himself, and he doesn't claim his throne, he does still represent the dragon's opposite, a safe and just society ruled by its laws, instead of a dangerous and arbitrary society ruled by fear and violence. Plus, while Carrot doesn't kill the dragon, he does kill the bureaucrat responsible for everything by literally throwing the Book of Laws at his head. Now that's a heavy metaphor. Thanks for joining me again for today's Threadbare review, and I hope I'll see you next time. Until then, please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and if you have a little extra money to spare, you can support me on Patreon. Link in the description.